Welcome to the cityCURRENT Radio Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, powering the good, as well as timely, topical, relevant information. And with that in mind, we're honored to have our first guest, John High. He's the Chief Strategist with VC3, which is a charter partner in cityCURRENT. They know all about technology and leveraging it to power the good. So, John, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. How are you?
Doing very well. So,
Good.
VC3, let's start with some context. Give listeners a little background on the company and obviously your focus in the world of technology.
Sure. So VC3 is what we like to call a managed service provider. So if you have a company, you don't want to have an IT person, or you feel like your expertise is too thin, you engage a company like VC3, and for a monthly retainer, we basically keep everything you have running up to best practices, secure, your data protected. And we do that on a pretty large footprint. We're about to complete an acquisition that will have us in 17 states as of July. And our superpower, if you will, is local government, municipalities. And so we have, in the 250 range of municipalities that we serve across the Southeast.
Talk about scalability, because you mentioned the municipalities, which obviously when you talk about that gives listeners an idea of highly regulated, extremely important for security. So if you can handle that, then you should be able to handle with ease smaller companies, mid-size, and obviously larger as well. So talk about scope and structure.
Yeah, so, and it helps that we speak that language, right? We work with police departments, fire departments, and public works people, and we know those languages. And so our solutions, thankfully, scale down to like village of wherever, up to larger cities, suburbs of metros. And so we have kind of that sweet spot of 5,000 to 50,000 citizens. That's kind of the range that we do. And so we've added services like managed security, and we've bolstered our data protection systems. We have application development expertise. And so we've written records management systems for municipalities. And so our scope has grown in our ability to deliver services that add value to even the small to the larger municipalities.
Talk about on your end some of the major trends, and there's three that we definitely want to cover, and that's communication, culture, and operations. Communication now has become so important, not just internal, obviously, with your own employees and stakeholders, because everyone, for the most part, is now more spread than ever before with a lot of individuals working from home. So communication has taken on a new importance, but also communication external with customers to talk about operations and are you open for business, are you not, the new safety protocols. So communication has taken on a whole new meaning, especially related to obviously technology. So talk about the trend that you're seeing related to communication.
Well, so I'll be the least tech-centric IT guy that you'll ever talk to about this. So I think, and it's maybe this old school, I think communication is in the DNA of the person. It's not all about tools, right? When I say least IT-centric, I'm talking about like IT is an enabler. IT is not the destination. It's a tour guide on the journey. And so whether it's Zoom or Teams or Slack or whatever you Skype, whatever you use, those are just tools to enable what should be in you already, if that makes sense.
Talk about, though, you mentioned Zoom and Teams. One of the important components is video, like we're doing right now. We're doing this through video, through Zoom. And I feel like video has become even more important because while we can't see each other necessarily physically and socially distanced and all of those, at least video allows you to still see and have that connection. And so video has taken on to me a brand new importance.
It has. It has it. We actually instituted I wouldn't say a policy, but we did a strong urging when we did the pivot back in March to this, that some engineers, their personality types are a strong I. They prefer to not share their video. They didn't like what was in the background or whatever else. And you lose at least 50% of the efficacy of the communication without the video. So we almost mandated using video. And so in lieu of the circumstances that we all live in, I think video is paramount. It's so important to have that interaction, be able to see your face, body language. You know, I've had engineers kind of, doing this kind of thing. I know they're not engaged. It's the same thing I would read in the room if I was in person with them. So to me, if we're living in this remote communication circumstance that we are, and I think it's going to be some level of permanence, because our employees, when surveyed, like 2/3 of them want to keep doing this. They don't want to go back to normal. It's critical that video is used.
Talk about with that some best practices, because I feel like for companies, you don't want to have too many things running at the same time. So streamlining and standardization becomes really important. And then also too, leading by example, having those internal champions and having the leaders. Back to communication, a big part of that is role modeling and making sure that everyone has a good example to look for in terms of what that communication looks like. So standardization and kind of the role modeling to me are really important. Talk about it from your perspective.
Well, and they are. And so our leadership team, CEO on down, they are users of the technology, but they're users in a way that we want everyone else to use it. They have a good setup, good camera, good lighting, good office environment. I mean, some people, and we had to enable that. Like when we first pivoted, believe it or not, some IT people had lousy environments at home. They didn't have good camera, a microphone, headphones, whatever. And so we funded that. I mean, that first 4 weeks, we were really on the hook for a lot of cameras and speakers and all kinds of stuff. But it's not only the interpersonal communication. So our CEO does roughly weekly video messages. And so they're going to record a message, because we normally would do a company meeting, and we still do that. But in between those times, he's doing video updates on, hey, here's our read of the tea leaves for the pandemic. Here's what business climate's like, and stuff like that. And he is reinforcing the behavior of how we communicate. Our meetings, he does video. He does it well. He's not doing his own thing and has a separate setup from everyone else. He's very much, I think, role modeling that behavior for the staff.
Give me one tip on your end when it comes to companies communicating a little bit better, and it can be internal or external, but just give me one tip on your end that you think every company would benefit from this bit of advice.
Oh boy, there's a ton of options. And so, well, to go back to what we were just talking about, I think the video, and even like with clients, as much as possible, I was so reliant on email, and I still am. It's like oxygen, right? So it's constant flow of emails. I just think that it raises the bar for understanding, receiving the message, hearing your client, knowing their temperature. Maybe they're not ecstatic with your service, whatever else. I think it's important to get that level of interaction like that we're having now with video. And so I think it's important to infuse that as much as possible into what you're doing. We do video messaging. I could do an email blast to my staff every so often. I can do a PowerPoint update, and I can even record the slideshow. I do video updates. I do this, even if I do it at 6 in the morning, I record it and I send it to them and they can watch it. I can call out people, so I can say, hey, Jeremy, good job closing those 10 tickets, this past week. And it hits home. It's just more meaningful. And I think now that we're all remote, we're the boys in the bubble. I think meaningful communication is important.
Yeah, that's great advice. Let's switch over and talk about culture. I think culture is really important, especially once again, where the dynamic is different. Whereas, like you said, you could tap somebody on the shoulder. There was proximity.
Yeah.
Now there's distance. And so culture takes on a new meaning.
Yeah.
Talk about culture from your perspective related to technology.
Well, so it's interesting. We did a webinar on this fairly recently, and we talked about, I've come across organizations in the past that maybe they're a bit more old school. They require seats and seats. If you're not in your seat at your desk, in your office, in the building, There's a concern by leadership or the culture of that organization that you're not getting the job done. And so I think this pivot has been very difficult for some organizations. These places are used to having everything visible to them under the roof, and so it creates if there's not a good measurement KPIs, if there's not good accountability, if there's not good communication, which we talked about, then it's a real struggle. So the culture of every organization isn't conducive to the way that we all have to work now. Now, the more progressive organizations is great. In fact, we've actually seen a spike in productivity almost to the detriment of, like, I'm online from 6 in the morning till 6 at night. I maybe take 20 minutes for lunch, or my lunch gets booked over. So the pendulum swings to work-life balance. If your culture was really great on work-life balance, it was easier to mitigate that under the norm that we all grew up with. But now you're always online, you're always on. And so you've got to find some discipline in terms of, as a leader, and you have to culturize that in your organization. You've got to decide, hey, I want you to go take a walk at lunch, or I want you to log off at 5:30, or, so you gotta turn off the faucet somehow. So it's kind of a rambling answer, but basically it amounts to some organizations, the culture struggles because they're not able to extend accountability and measure their employees' performance remotely. And some are really down with it, but it's difficult because you lose work-life balance.
You mentioned KPI, key performance indicator.
Yeah.
Give me one of the things that you think, when you talk about kind of the new way to measure productivity and the things that you're looking at now. Give me an example of maybe one thing or a couple of things that you're looking at now that you think other companies would benefit kind of turning their eye toward, that would help them to be better at managing culture.
It's really basic, and I know that not every type of organization builds for their time. We have engineers that they build for their time, like a lawyer and accountant would. But honestly, and even though you might have like salaried employees, just a timesheet or some measure of time worked, because you're probably seeing a spike in that since March. And so that a little bit is okay, but we have to be, acknowledging of the balance in someone's life. You can't just go from 45 hours to 55 hours and there's no impact, right? That has, maybe productivity is up a little bit, but there's an impact to that person's life. And ultimately your productivity as an organization. So time worked per week. It seems simple. And if you're a salaried person, the last thing you want to do is track your time. At VC3, it doesn't matter. I mean, the CEO, everyone tracks their time every week. And it's not because we're all hourly. It's just, it's an accountability and a transparency thing. So that's one.
Yeah, and that's a great one too. To your point, back to role modeling. If everyone is doing it, then one, it's fair across the board. But two, It's not, like you said, to necessarily say, well, you're not working enough. What it really is are you overworking, and where are your boundaries? And I think it really is important. If you're not tracking it, you don't really know. Time goes by so fast. So I really like that. That's a great tip. Talk about operations being kind of the third major piece of this. When you talk about operations and being able to, one, have the structure, but also the security, which once again is different now, because you could kind of lock things down when everyone was in a geographical area. Now everyone is spread out. And in many cases, sometimes even using their personal devices, which creates a whole nother level of complication. So talk about operations from your vantage point.
Well, that's a great question. Let's kind of focus on the security side of that first. When this first happened in March, you're right. People were using their home PCs or their personal laptops, and you're behind some piece of equipment that you bought at Best Buy, not knocking Best Buy, but you bought an $80 device to get your home internet set up, and you're logged into that. And the way that some places were set up, that person was either siphoning data across the wire to their local computer at home, or they at least were viewing it on the screen. Well, then what happened? Kids weren't going to school. So maybe you've got the payroll of the entire company roster on your screen, and your 10-year-old wants you to make lunch, and they're over your shoulder hovering. It's like, make me lunch. And all, is it the end of the world that your 10-year-old saw this? No, but it's not ideal either. There could be more sensitive information. So there's the data security of, like, whether shoulder surfing or inadvertent viewing of data. Then there's the lack of encryption. Like, if I pull sensitive data across the wire, I don't have the same kind of encryption and security protection that I have at home that I do at work. So companies have invested robustly, usually, in a firewall and in data encryption and stuff like that. And that's not always in place, for the home worker. So as much as possible, you want to use your home device, your work device. So hopefully you have, like, a laptop, you take it home, and then hopefully you have, like, a VPN, a virtual private network, or some kind of a secure connection that you make to the home office, or to the mothership, I guess, the actual office. And so that at least takes care of the encryption side. And then also you have all of the endpoint protection, the antivirus, anti-malware, and stuff like that. But hackers are just having a buffet on people that are working remotely. The scam, it's like the holiday shopping season. The scam activity has really gone up in the last several months because people are just considered more vulnerable. They're more spread out. They're on probably less secure equipment. And so the number of compromises has increased dramatically.
I know that with a lot of the store-bought modems and routers and things like that, they have a similar password, which makes it easier, like right out of the box. That's
like the same password.
Right. So that's a major issue.
Yeah.
Then taking advantage of things like the whatever it is, the different
multi-factor authentication.
Yes, I've got all these buzzwords I've got to know. But
yes,
having different layers of the authentication, and there's so many little things that people just now need to be aware of that they just probably didn't think of before that really are important to protecting their security.
Oh yeah, the average modem or router that you buy off the shelf from Walmart or whatever else, it has like a checkbox for security. It's not like you can define all these different settings for different security. So it's like secure or it's not, and I would contend that it never is. Great point on multi-factor. I mean, if you're unsure about overall security, you want to enhance what you're doing, at a minimum, multi-factor authentication, right? So multi-factor is something you have, something you know, or something you are. So like if Google, you have it enabled for Google, you put your email, your password, and it sends you a text. All right, that PIN number. Now technically it's two things you have, but it's a second thing at least. Microsoft has multi-factor authentication built in. So if you're like an Office 365 person, you can configure that out of the box for free. You can get a little app for your phone, and you log in, and it sends you a push to your phone, and you have to say yes, approve, or deny. So that's something you have, your phone, something you know, your password. So it's two factors. So that's a great way to go. And if you're at all unsure about the level of security you have, that's a great first measure to do.
Wrap up with one last tip when it comes to operational security, efficiency, productivity. What's one more thing that you would encourage businesses to take advantage of or to do?
It's hard to narrow it down to one. I'm a big proponent, and this isn't the answer that you'll often get to that question, but I'm a big stickler for physical security. So like picture a business setting, right? You can spend $1 million to fortify your network, put firewalls in place, and encrypt your data and everything else. If you somehow dupe me into walking in the building with me, and you've got coveralls with a name patch on, and you find your way around, and you get to a computer that someone left unlocked while they went to a meeting for an hour, you're in. Unless someone stops you, and as long as you act like you know what you're doing, they don't. So physical security can undo so much cyber and data security. So I'm a big stickler for physical security, even if it's at home and your teenager's at home or your spouse or whatever else. I just think that it's important to lock your computer in and do things that physically protect the cyber presence that you have.
Nice. wrap up and tell listeners where to go to learn more about VC3. So website, social media, where do we go?
Yeah, the best starting place is vc3.com. That's our website. There's links to social off from there. And we would love to have a conversation with you guys. We love the Memphis market. Love the restaurants in Memphis. And I miss that very much. But yeah, we'd love to talk to you if you have any needs. And we're growing. Like I said, we're going to do an acquisition here in July 1st, and we're going to grow into 17 states. So we're coming to a town near you.
Yeah, very exciting. Well, John, thank you for all you and your team do. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.